where it started, with how and where and why it was started. In 1964, a branch of the Johannesburg African Chamber of Commerce in Soweto, which was under Mr. Maponya, Richard Maponya, and the secretary there was Mr. Bigvai Masekela. A decision was taken at that branch of JACOC, Johannesburg African Chamber of Commerce, that we need to establish a national chamber to enable black business people to speak with one voice. That idea was agreed upon, and a decision was taken that the chamber should initiate a campaign nationally to sell this idea that a national chamber was required. And in 1964, in April 29, there was an inaugural conference of what was then called the National African Chamber of Commerce, which later became what we call NAFCOC, the National African Federated Chamber of Commerce. It was at that conference in 1964 where the idea of the African Bank was raised and discussed for the first time. Why the African Bank? There was a debate on the difficulties that black businessmen encountered in getting funding from white banks at that time. And during that debate, I was one of those who came recently from the United States, where I had experience with black banks in the United States. I actually saved money, my little money, in the United States in an African bank in North Carolina. So I told the people, the business people, during the discussion that probably time had come for black people to do what the black Americans did when they encountered similar problems with their businesses. Instead of worrying about not being funded, they should start their own institution. And this was a very popular suggestion. But then, how do we do it? We've got to register the institution. That's going to require money. We are going to need the capital to start the bank, which we don't have. What do we do? It was then suggested that those who agree with the idea that we start our own bank, make a donation, small donation from our pockets, and put this money on the table. The chairman said, well, most of you do have loose money in your pockets, which you are going to drink when we leave from here. Put that money on the table. let's not forget this important idea. There were a lot of doubtful Thomases in the crowd, although they agreed with the idea, but when it came to the practical side of indicating willingness to sacrifice, there were very few people, the constructive minority. They came forward and put a little cents on the table, and they amounted only to 70 rand. Business people. But a decision was taken at that conference that we should start by creating what was called a national fund, because this was a national institution. All our members from all over the country would have to contribute to the national fund at our meetings. So the national fund opened an account at Barclays Bank, Church Street, Pretoria, in 1964. The chairman of the conference, NAFCOC conference, who was elected was Mr. Richard Maponya. He stood up at the end of the conference to say, "We are 18 million Africans in South Africa. We just need to go out of this conference and request our people to donate 1 rand towards the establishment of the bank. And by next year, when we come back, we shall be having 18 million rands to register the bank." We all clapped our hands as we left the conference. But this, of course, was better said than done. When we went out to meet our branches and our business colleagues in different parts of South Africa, lots of doubts existed. First of all, we didn't have trained people in this field. We don't have managers. How are we going to run a bank without having trained people to run it? How are we going to overcome the doubts in the hearts of our people? Because in the history of our country, we do have people who did, in the long past, tried to create financial institutions for black people in the country. One of them was Clemens Kadali, who came from Malawi in the 1920s. He came here and said he would create a financial institute, which he called the International Commercial Union. The International Commercial Union. This idea stole the hearts of many people, old people, black people at that time. I know that my father participated in donating even cattle in the rural areas towards Kadali's ICU institution. Now, it never existed. The only thing I remember about Kadali now is that there's a hall in East London called the Kadali Hall, where some of us learned our dancing there at Kadali Hall in East London, but nothing else that is visible came out of Kadali's effort. So the old people that we went, that we saw in our campaign, some of them still remembered that there was Kadali, and what happened to Kadali? Now you want money from us. No. And whilst we thought in 1 year we might have raised a lot of money to register the bank, it didn't happen. But we did not lose patience. We kept on throwing money slowly and steadily into the national fund. It was growing very slowly. It only achieved momentum after I was elected president of NAFCOC in 1968. But before my appointment as president of NAFCOC in 1968, after Mr. Maponya came another president, the second president. I was the third. The second president, Mr. Konko, has to be credited with the appointment of a researcher to investigate how this bank should operate and how it should be started, and give us the technical problems that had to be overcome. Mr. Konko appointed a certain Dr. Bexi in Cape Town. He was an economist from Hungary who came and formulated a plan for starting the bank. He produced his plan at our 1967 conference in Cape Town, the NAFCOC conference in Cape Town. And his story, his research findings were almost negative. But at the same time, his presentation gave us hope. So much hope that the presenter got a standing ovation after presenting a somewhat negative report in Cape Town. I remember that Dr. Bexi did highlight some of the problems we were going to encounter. The first one was training. You people don't have training. You don't have managers to run the bank. How can people believe you? Then he said, for a bank to succeed, people have to have trust. That element of trust is not there at the moment. How do you cultivate trust so that people come? And then he said that people cannot put money in an institution where they feel tomorrow when they come there'll be no money. So it's going to be a difficult thing to do. Then you have got a government that is not pro-black development at that time. How do you expect the apartheid government to support an African bank in South Africa? There are so many restrictions against black business development. How can this bank now succeed? He enumerated all these problems, and finally he said, funding. Where do where are you going to find the money to run this bank? Your people's money is scattered all over. There are no institutions, financial institutions in the black community that one could rely upon to contribute sufficient fund to register and enable the bank to get off the ground. Now, with all those difficulties, he says, the challenge that I would like to place before you, ladies and gentlemen, is for you to show me one country in the world that didn't have to overcome the same difficulties. Show me one country or one set of people who started everything without having to overcome difficulties. What you need more than anything else is commitment to the realization of your dream. And with that, the African Bank could one day become a reality. And when he sat down, we clapped hands for a white gentleman. In those days, it was very rare for black people to applaud a white man. But then this one got our applause and a standing ovation because he spoke the truth. We all said, well, it will be difficult, but this man spoke the truth. But then the following year, I was elected president. And with all these difficulties, I had to start thinking and planning my own how I would lead the campaign for the establishment of the African Bank. In 1972, I accompanied some NAFCOC people who went on a visit to London. And during that visit, I requested the chairman of Barclays Bank, Sir Anthony Keith, to grant me audience. And he readily agreed to welcome me to a lunch in London, and I requested a few of my NAFCOC colleagues to join me to that lunch in London, 1972. And when I got to the lunch, well, I had to speak before the lunch. I had to sing for my food. But I started this way. I have come to open dialogue with your bank because I believe Barclays Bank owe my people. We have a branch of your bank in South Africa that is flourishing with the support of black people. But we now have a project where we have difficulties which I think you may be able to assist. And I presented the problems that were presented to us by the researcher in Cape Town. First of all, education. I said you might be able to do something about training our people in banking. the funding, I said, you may be able to take some shareholding and put in some money into the bank, and then your participation will create the most important thing, trust in our people. And then I sat down. Then the chairman stood to answer. Sir Anthony Keith stood up and said, yes, of course, we owe you. He agreed. We owe you. I was highly gratified to hear him say that. We owe you. And we can do something. About training, we are prepared to offer training in your country if it is possible. If it is not possible, we will open opportunities for your people to train outside your country in places like Nigeria in banking. It was gratifying to hear. And then he talked about shareholding. Minor, we will, if this project succeeds, we will be happy to become minor shareholders and put in some money into the bank. And in doing so, we will have created an atmosphere that might generate trust in your project. Oh, then I was very happy to hear all that, and I came back to give a very positive report to the executive of NAFCOC in 1972. And thereafter, my report from London the inflow of funds into the national fund quickened. People said, hey, even Barclays Bank is interested, so it means there's something good in this thing. So people came and put in money, and our target was 1 million only. 1 million rands took us 10 years to raise. It was only in 1975 that we were able to register the African Bank. So the Volkskas, Afrikaner Bank, called the Volkskas, the Finanzbank, and Standard Bank became shareholders. They contributed towards the shareholding in the bank, and they also wanted to sit on our board of the bank. I think it was mainly to see what black people were planning. Then we agreed to that. Then the second obstacle which the government placed before us, homelands. We would like the homeland governments to approve of this project before we can register it. We had to run around South Africa. We started with Chief Buthelezi, who gladly supported the effort. Then we went to Matanzima. He also supported the project. We went to Sebe. He was rather lukewarm for us. He didn't say he supports it, but he says we will see as time goes on. And he didn't say I will not support. So he was more or less in the middle. And then we went to Chief Mupedi in the Free State, said yes, I'll support. We went to Patudi. Patudi said yes, I'll support. We went to Nsangwisi. Nsangwisi, yes, we'll support. We went to Venda. Our friend Patrick Mpepu, yes, I'll support. And then the final homeland government was Bophuthatswana, who said no, we will not support. But 6 out of 7 homeland governments supported the project, the establishment of the African Bank. 2 of the homeland governments said we will also buy shares if the bank is established. And we were highly gratified by the response from KwaZulu, as well as the second one was Nsangwisi, Professor Nsangwisi from his homeland. Now, once we got the approval of the homelands, then the government relaxed its opposition and agreed that we could register the African Bank. But they had put another requirement. The first branch of this bank, if it is registered, must be in the homeland. It mustn't be in the urban areas, which was called the white areas. It must be in the homeland. And we tried to find out which is the best homeland where we could start with the first branch of the bank. And the nearest to Pretoria was Ga-Rankuwa. And of course, in the campaign, we discovered that we had much more supporters of the African Bank project from Bophuthatswana, where the leader had said no. So we in 1975, the first branch of the African Bank was established at Ga-Rankuwa, and there were lots of people there who witnessed the opening of the first branch, and great rainfall. Rain fell, and the Botswanas shouted "Pula" when the first branch was opened in Ga-Rankuwa, 1975, and a song was made for that celebration by one of the professors, Professor Mzilikazi Khumalo. He has a song on the African Bank to celebrate the opening of the first branch at Ga-Rankuwa in 1975.